So this segment turns to from division to unity and discusses the foundations of the world's most durable international organization, the United Nations. And later I will be referring in the end of the segment to the atomic age, which is another facet of the period. It is crucial here to remember and understand that the United Nations did not emerge after the end of the war, did not emerge as this universal kind of organization that would include everyone. It actually emerged as a project from the side of the Allies, namely the Anglo-Americans. However, it quickly became, in theory and in practice, an all-inclusive organization that aimed at offering a more stable and durable peace than what the League of Nations offered before the Second World War. Let's say, it originated in this American place called Dumbarton Oaks in a period between August and October 1944. Initially, although, as I said, it was an Anglo-American project, the Republic of China, the Soviet Union were also involved in the discussions. The discussions revolved around the planning of a new international organization to replace the League of Nations. It's an interesting question here: to what extent was Europe involved or less involved in the discussion? What is for sure is that with the Second World War, the balance of the world power tended to be shifting from Europe towards the other side of the Atlantic. What were the chief aims of the United Nations? To maintain international peace and security, to achieve international cooperation in the solution of international economic, social, and other humanitarian problems, and to create a center for harmonizing the actions of nations, and to push towards achieving these common aims, the biggest of which was peace and security. It was, the discussions started in, I think, 1942, 1943 between Churchill and Truman. And in 1944, there were the conferences that involved that made the organization not only an Anglo-American affair, but a global organization. And it was initially, and it was officially founded in 1945, with 51 countries committed to maintaining international peace and security, developing friendly relations among nations, and promoting social progress, better living standards, and human rights. These are the three pillars. And the four purposes that officially the organization has are to keep peace, to develop friendly relations among nations, help nations work together to improve the lives of poor people, and, as I said earlier, become a center for harmonizing the actions of nations. How to uphold peace? There is the Security Council. This is something that didn't exist in the League of Nations. A permanent council that should consists of 15 members. The French Republic was one of the first members, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, the United Kingdom, the United States. All these states are permanent members, and then there are non-permanent members that are being rotated in the council. And the very interesting thing, and the thing that has caused all sorts of discussions, is that decisions at the Security Council level are taken only by unison. Every member has the right to veto. Now, that is the one aspect of the peace that comes in the period of the Cold War. The foundation of the world's most effective to this day, and that's open a question for discussion, organization, the United Nations. And in the link after this discussion, you will have, after this segment, you can see there's a link to the United Nations archival project, where you can browse through and see the various different archives pertaining to the genesis of this organization. Another aspect of the 1940s and early 1950s is the consolidation of Western economic cooperation. The United Nations is a project on international governance. It's a political project. However, there's also the building of institutions that aim to stabilize and create better conditions for world economy. This is what we usually call as the Bretton Woods system. The key players here are the USA, Western Europe, Australia, and Japan. The Bretton Woods system gives rise to organizations such as the World Trade Organization. There's a lot of talk today about the World Trade Organization, World Trade Rules, World Trade Tariffs. Effectively, the idea behind the World Trade Organization is that there needs to be a global forum whereby it will regulate the trade and facilitate the trade among countries across the globe. And the other organization that you probably may have heard of, but probably, is the World Trade, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, which also we know today from its involvement in economic crisis in Europe and elsewhere. And it again, the idea is that it's quite a benevolent idea when it is first designed, and this is for the International Monetary Fund to become a facilitator of economic development across the world and help with programs, countries to sort out their finances and make themselves competitive in the global market. Now I'm going to switch on for the remainder of this segment to another facet of our post-war, second post-World War world, and this is the coming of the atomic age. In 1945, as I'm sure you all know, the US drops 2 atomic bombs on Japan that effectively end the war on the US side of things. There is a race in the mid 1940s as to the acquisition of the bomb. The USSR formally acquires the atomic bomb in 1949, and this creates, the so-called equilibrium of terror. The idea that the world's 2 superpowers with these big systems of states and satellite states and institutions around them have the ability to effectively annihilate not only one another with the pressing of a button, but in fact the whole world. So a very interesting question here I'd like you to reflect on is the question of whether the bomb race and the acquisition of the atomic bomb created the World War, or did it come as the Cold War, or did it come as a result of the Cold War? It's a bit of a chicken and it's a hen and egg question. Did the bomb create these Cold War divisions, or the bomb came as an outcome of these kinds of divisions? And here I allude to a quote from a very well-known historian, Eric Hobsbawm, who I've used before. Hobsbawm argues that when the USSR acquired the nuclear weapons, both superpowers plainly abandoned war as an instrument of policy against one another, since it was the equivalent of a suicide pact. And this points to another question. Did the acquisition of the capability to annihilate one another and the whole world make the world safer? this is a matter open for discussion. I would really like to hear your views on this, on the tutorials. Well, that's I'll go back to that. You can see the information about the Bretton Woods system in the PowerPoint as well, so we can discuss that during the tutorial. And here I would like to also note the nuclear tensions that proliferated in the 1950s. The Korean War in the early 1950s increased the USSR-Soviet polarization. I mean the Soviet and American polarization. There was a moment in the 1950s where the nuclear war loomed large at the horizon. More states at the time wanted to build atomic bomb programs to become major players in the international setting. And in 1954, a nuclear test in a region that is stipulated in the PowerPoint marked an important rise in public awareness to the danger of that nuclear energy poses to the environment. It's not only the people that will become annihilated by the proliferation of nuclear energy, it's also the environment. And I have to say that from the mid-1950s onwards, there is a broad movement and coalition across the West that is for peace against all these experimentations with nuclear energy and nuclear war, effectively, with the acquisition of nuclear weapons. And gradually, as we move on from the 60s, there is also efforts to de-escalate the proliferation of nuclear weapons and get big states to agree on treaties that would gradually, as it were, reduce the amount of nuclear weapons. And this is discussions that are going on to this very day. So I'd like to now save a couple of minutes to conclude this session. First, I'd like you to keep the basics in mind. What we have in this period we're talking about. A new division between Eastern and Western Europe marks the transition of political power from Europe to the USSR, to the USA and the USSR. A divided Germany comes at the center of a new stage, the stage of the Cold War. The UN, at the same time, emerges as the ultimate means to heal divisions and maintain peace. Despite the UN, though, the 1950s and 60s is a period of nuclear tensions, an atomic age. And this is pretty much the end of this segment and of this lecture indeed. And there's one aspect that I've left behind because I will use it to start as a starter for the lecture after Reading Weeks. So your memory may be hazy, so you'll pick it up then. And this is the aspect of the reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War, and particularly the American involvement in the reconstruction of Europe through the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine. And this will take us to discuss also this quite interesting project that of European unity that is called the European Community and later the EU. The forms of collaboration that the European states, the Western European states, find among themselves. And this will be the subject of the lecture, of the forthcoming lecture after our break. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and do have a good and productive reading week.